Everyone, this is just going to be a very quick stream in which I share an endgame position from chapter 1 of Hellsten's endgame strategy. And this week on Book Club, which is one of the Lee Chess 45-45 side leagues, we've been doing some endgame sparring, and this position, created by Ecclesiastic on Lee Chess, is particularly interesting. It's white to move, and clearly white cannot go for a win because all white's pawns are fixed. So although white has more pawns, his pawns are fixed, and if black wants a draw, he can simply shuffle his king up and down, and the reason white can't go for the win is because if ever white plays this, black can take. You have to take back at some stage, so you might as well take it back immediately. And whether the king is here or here, the black king can now come here. And the aim of the black king is, of course, to get to this square, protecting the queening square. And there's nothing white can do. So black has opposition. If the white king came here, black would take the opposition. And he has this, whichever way white then went, black would then go the other way, but stepping forwards. And if white avoids, again, black prepares to keep the opposition. And there's no use coming forwards, because otherwise I just push. So what can so you'd have to return to the same position. So if he does this, again, we get to this key square. And now there's nothing. This, if you came up again, we'd come up again like this. And so we're always making sure we're controlling the squares where the pawn pushes. And if ever this, now you can go here, and if ever the king tries to stop me coming to this square, then I take the opposition. And you have to go one way or the other, whichever way you go. If you go this way, I push here. If you go this way, I push here, and this pawn is now queening. So that's the first thing to note about this position, is that white cannot make progress. f3 is a huge blunder because black then gets the opposition. So that's something quite important. So black can always get a draw just by holding still. But can black do better? He can actually put a lot of pressure on white. So it's white to move. So we can't do this, so we have to step back. It turns out there's only one move, I think, keeping the draw in this position. Yes, engine agrees. And it's stepping back here. And let's explain why. So the key thing about this position is that if ever the black king comes to this square, it's very important that the white king faces off against this black king. Because if the white king is hanging around here, when the white, if say that the king goes here and the white king has to step back, for example, then this black king is invading and can come in here and here, and you can try and defend this pawn, but then you can go even chase after these pawns. Or if you defend the pawn like this, we can have like a waiting move, and you could try and do this, but then push takes, and we have the opposition to push through this pawn. So that's the first thing to notice about this position. Whenever black king comes here, the white king must come here. So in endgames, one quite important idea is shoulder barging. You try and make the king walk around your king to take a longer route. And as a consequence of shoulder barging, you have the idea of opposition, of if the king is here, you try and face off opposite it. In this, obviously, the face-off position, it turns out, is not here because this pawn is blocking the square. So it turns out the face-off position of here, it turns out, will be here. But what's really important first is if the king ever steps to here, we must step up to here to get to face off against it, so that we have the opposition and we block the king's entry. Okay, And so even more complicated than opposition is the idea of corresponding squares. And so we have these corresponding squares. If ever the black king comes here, we must come here. Now it turns out, if the black king ever comes here, we must go to this square to face off against it. We'll see why in a second. And if ever the and this is the starting position, if ever the if ever the black king comes here, we have to go here. If ever the king goes there, we have to go here. If ever the king is on this square, so the starting position, it turns out we have to go to this square. And again, we'll see why in a second. Okay, but now something interesting. What if the king goes to this square? So I'm trying to remember. So it turns out if the king goes to this square, we have to go to a blue square. So why is that? Imagine if the king goes to this square and we're hanging out on the red square. We have to always keep an eye on the green square. So if the king goes to the red square, we then go to the blue square. And if the king then goes to this blue square, we're stuck because we can't go to a blue square. So in order to be ready to be able to, if he ever goes to the green square, to get the opposition, it's very important. If the king ever goes to that blue square, we must also go to this blue square. Now here's the really tricky one. If the king ever goes to this square here, we must also be on this green square here. So in other words, so why is this? Because imagine the king stepped here and we were hanging out on one of these blue or red squares. Then the king, if we're on the blue square, then the king would go to the blue square and suddenly we have to go to a red square. And even to the red squares, even if we go to this square here, he can then come forward here and then we have to step back. Sorry, if we were on the green square already, he could go directly to the green square and we don't get the opposition. So this is the tricky one. So if he ever goes here, we must go here. If he ever goes forward, we haven't explained why, but we have to go to this blue square. If he's ever on this red square, because we must be on this blue square if he's on this blue square if he's ever on this one, it means when he's on the red square, he must be on the red square. On that blue square, we must be on this blue square again. We have less squares to deal with. And whenever he's on this square, we must be on this square here. If he comes forward, we back off. If he goes here, we go to the blue square. And that way we can keep the opposition. If he ever pushes this pawn, he loses a lot of his mobility and it's much easier just to shuffle. So let's just see this in practice. The corresponding square in the initial position to here is here. That was the so-called red square of the starting position. So we must step back. If he comes forward, we'll see why later. It turns out we need to face off if ever the king comes here. If he goes here, we must face off. If he goes here, again, the initial position, we must step back. Here we must face off. We must fade back. Now here's a tricky one. We need to make sure if he goes here, we can go here. So that's why we have to go here. And if you go here, you don't want to go here or here, or you'd be stuck on a blue or red, and he's got the choice of those blue or reds. That's when we have to step in. So in the initial position, this square has to correspond not only to here, but also to here. And if he steps forward, we step back. Steps forward, steps back. Now, the reason why these squares have to correspond to each other is because if we did this, then this, then this, we do have to take it, because if he does this, we have a waiting move. He steps back, push, and we're queening our pawn. So we have to take it, and then we can go here. And the problem is So what's the problem here? So when we go here, this pawn is actually further away, so it's more complicated for white to come and pick up this pawn and promote this pawn. So in this position, black is winning just by king f3, king d3. He can just go and pick up these pawns. No, sorry, this is this is tricky. You have to do this first, and then this, and you actually win this pawn, and so you get, okay, so you win this pawn, and now it's game over. So even if you try to get the opposition, it doesn't work because it's on the 6th rank by now. So, and we'll see why this doesn't work in the game position. If we step back here, then this doesn't happen. Hi there, Earth Sky. And the reason is because after this check here takes here, here. So, okay. Now he still has this this move to get the opposition. He can push the pawn. So this looks very dangerous for white because he's lost the opposition and black is able to invade. However, there's a subtle difference, which is we lost the vertical opposition, but we have this sort of horizontal opposition, and black can't play this, stopping us coming to this square. If you play this, white is suddenly winning. The tables have turned because black now can't hold on to this pawn. This pawn's going to get taken, and this pawn's going to promote. So, so in this position, black is going to try and gobble up these pawns and promote one of these two pawns. So takes. Oh, sorry, this is not what happened. So what happened is, king g2. It's the same thing. Takes. Now here, there's another tempting move, and it doesn't work, which is why not try and hold on to this pawn? And that loses because we lose a tempo. Black and this is very confusing because king h4 is good, but not king g3. So why is that? So king h4 is good because against king g3, white has. It's not so clear apparently. So so apparently white might even be winning this, and I don't get why. If we just, there's a problem in this final position which I didn't, oh yeah, queen to d7 check. I mean, this is all very complicated. Obviously we can never go to this file. Oh, we could go to this file like this. But why does that not work? Okay, obviously we can't in this move, so we can never go to this file here because otherwise the queen here will pick up our queen. We could go here. We never can go here because obviously then there's a diagonal here which is dangerous. So this, something like this would be natural. Queen here check. So why can't we just interpose? Takes, and white is winning this. Why is white winning this? Because black has got to gobble up these pawns in this order, and in the meantime apparently white gobbles this pawn and is able to defend. Let's actually, you can't just defend your pawn, so that you can't sort of come back and defend your pawn because white will just come with opposition. The black king here can't defend the pawn against a white king here. You'd be pushed aside. Takes, and so why does that not work actually? So I'm actually not sure, because you'd have, if there were, so takes, why can't black just get the opposition? It's something to do with there being more than because the pawns are doubled in some way. So why can't you just do this? b5, this. Oh, we can wait a move. No, b6. So king c6, tuck, tuck. And the problem is, because of these pawns here, we can now, normally this would be a draw because you'd be forced to go here and it's stalemate, but it's slightly different in this situation because you can wait a move. Earth Sky says, how about study the openings and middle game? Oh, this whole stream is just about one particular endgame, which I thought was very interesting. And this is the starting position. So there are 3 stages to this endgame. And the first stage, as we've discussed, is corresponding squares. It turns out that whenever the black king comes here, we must go here to stop it invading. So those are corresponding squares. Whenever the black king comes here, we must go here. Whenever the black king goes here, we must go here. And because of those two, whenever it goes to a blue square, we must go to a blue square, means whenever it goes here, we must also go to it. We must also go to this square, so that when it comes to the blue square, we're ready, or if it goes to the green square, we're still ready to oppose it. And then the really tricky one is if it ever goes to this square here, we must also go to this square here, so that if it chooses blue or red, we have a blue or red square to go to. If we're left hanging on one of the blue or red squares, if we were on the blue square, it would go to the blue square, and we can't go to a blue square to correspond to it. So we started, stage 1 is corresponding squares, illustrated here. Tuck, tuck. We have to go to the corresponding square in order to hold the draw. Back. And as I said, the reason why these are corresponding is because if in this position we go here, then this line, this is no good because black just pushes and we lose our opposition. And if we take, which is the natural thing to do, then this, and there's a waiting move. So this black comes in, if this black comes in, push, and this is the key point. The king is not here, so can't just go here and then white would win. So the king is actually pushed off from this pawn. Amazing idea. And so then that central pawn promotes. So it's very important that the king steps back and then gets opposition here. So even though this looks scary, we take, we get the opposition. It looks like black's regaining the opposition, but it's okay because we get around, we're on this key square here, so we can come in and take control of this pawn, and black has to go for a pawn race. Okay, now the first idea in the pawn race is you cannot go here and try and hold on to this pawn, and the reason for that, we saw this, this creates a very difficult situation where actually white ends up winning. For some reason, if the king goes here, it's not so straightforward. So apparently this is still winning for black, but the easy way to see why this is winning for black is actually, if you try and hold on to your pawn, is actually because of this move. Because now white can't hold on to this pawn after all, and if he goes here, you're taking here, and white has to spend an extra tempo getting out the way. In any such position, the way to calculate who's winning a race is you count moves. So here it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And how about black? Against those 6 moves, he does 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Huh. So it's not clear. If it's 5, maybe white does have a chance, you might think. So let's do that again. It's this. He's promoted. When he's promoted, his pawn will be here. Hang on. So let's count it again. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So after 5 moves, black's already promoted. Then white promotes. So it's not so obvious why this is a win for black, because it's only 1 move difference. So there has to be something quite subtle. So the first thing to notice, yes, this is not so straightforward, why black is winning. But the first thing to notice is white can't go here when he gets out of the way of his pawn, because otherwise this promotion is with check. So he checks, and then he can come back and sit his king in front of that pawn, and then bring his king in and win. So he can't go here, so he'd have to go here. And the key for black is actually, I remember how you do this now. The key for black is to force the king to this square. And the way you do it is you push this pawn, push the pawn, push the pawn, push the pawn, and then you very subtly bring your king in, stopping the pawn from promoting. White has to go here to protect his own pawn, and then we keep going. And the problem is he's going to have to move the king again and waste a tempo. So if you just go push, 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 he's landing with the check, and therefore he loses. The thing to do in these situations is you don't really want to let the king get here if you can avoid it. Trying to think what's the... this is still not so straightforward how to stop the promotion. Okay, so you can always stop the promotion in a boring way, which is with a sequence of checks and then bringing the king in gradually. And I think we might have to do that. So the way you do this, how does the queen stop a pawn? Check. So he has to go away from his pawn. And you can just kind of slide your... Okay, this is not necessarily the most efficient way of doing it. If he ever comes in front of his pawn, we can just bring our... no, we can't, because that's stalemate. But we can... Yeah, so if he does this... Okay, let's think. What do you do again? Oh yeah, you could do something like... this... Oh yes, this is what you can do. You can do this. And so that's pinning the pawn, and then this checkmate is coming next. Or if he runs here, then it's very easy. Okay, so he'll try and hold on to his pawn. So you can snake your queen up the board. Check, king here, and then this is the key point. You get your queen to here, and then he's forced to go here, and then you can bring your king in. So now notice this whole method doesn't work if this pawn is a bishop's pawn. Because imagine if this was a bishop's pawn, king would go here, which would be the corner, and so when you take the pawn, it's stalemate. So, okay, so usually the best way of the queen stopping a pawn is get your queen to this square, but that's actually not possible here. Now it turns out there's a quicker way. This, queen e6, this, and queen d6 was a quicker way of getting that position I described. Okay, so it's very important in this position, white does not try and hold on to the pawn, he has to go and take this pawn directly. Okay, so takes here. And again, this is quite a sensitive position. It's very you don't want to go here, because otherwise this promotes with check. But you don't want to go here either, or black just comes and picks up your pawn for free. And white can't even ever pick up these pawns, because this pawn is running. But if you go here, there's the same problem we had here. We could just push this pawn, and whenever the pawn gets to here, we subtly put our king here, and you're put onto a queening square. And so we promote with check. So there's a key move here for white, which is not to move the king at all, to push the pawn first. And so this is a rather challenging move, attacking this pawn. And again, this position's rather critical, because if you go this way, then there's this. If you count it, we're queening on the same move, but there's a problem. And the problem is check, pushing you onto... No, that's not the way to do it. This is a better way of doing it. So it's pushing you onto this file, check, you're forced to defend your queen, takes, and then we promote another queen, and you can't do anything. So very subtle and very hard to see in advance, but you have to go this way. And after you go this way, push, queen, and black gets to check first. Okay, so this has been the second stage. So going back to the initial position, in the first stage, in order to hold a draw, white needed corresponding squares. He needed to go to the corresponding square in order to hold the draw, to stop an invasion. He managed to do that. Now the second stage is a pawn race, and it's very important to keep the king and pawn close together and to put the king on safe squares in the pawn race. And now we're into the third stage of this endgame, which is the queen endgame. And the key in the queen endgame is try to have an active queen so you've got chances for perpetual. Here, obviously, black is the one with the passed pawn. So for now, black has the advantage. And so white is trying to hold a draw by getting some kind of perpetual. Or by getting some counterplay with his own pawns. So the idea of this move is you want to put the queen here and potentially got here, and then we're maybe not losing the pawn race. That's the idea. So if the king were to just move like so, does that work? If they just traded off, yeah, white would be very happy. So push, takes, push, h2, push, queen. So although black is queening first, white is queening with check. And also white has an extra couple of pawns which are easily defended by the king. So that's advantage white in that position, because queen and pawn wins against a queen. So that's why black tries to defend actively, and white doesn't really have any checks here. And the basic method, so he can't sort of hold on to this pawn forever, because we could have some check picking up this pawn. But even if black loses this pawn, the position is really quite hard to hold for white. And here's the key. You want to push your pawns, but what you also want to stop are diagonal checks from here which support a promotion. If it ever came down to 2 black queens against 1 white queen, the 2 black queens would be too strong. So what you really want to do is just make sure this diagonal is closed. So check, push, and this is very threatening, because if we just did this, sorry, we can't do that because it's threatening to get a queen. So the really nice move here is this g2. So if black gets a queen, then we also get a queen, and probably white's winning because white has the check and the queen's going to win. So this is a really good move. Black has to take this pawn, and as I said, black had the advantage and white has to now try and get a draw. And you can force the draw in this position because this queen is now out of position and white can just throw continuous checks on that black king. So if the king tries to come out, then this pawn would be lost and white would have the advantage, obviously. So you want to hold on to the pawn. And what you want to do is you want to give checks that can't be blocked by a queen coming back. So you just go check at a diagonal, check, this is, and nothing much that can be done. If you try and do this, we continue. If you do this, we saw already, we check at this diagonal, and you want to hold on to the pawn. So if this, then this, and if this, then this. So queen endgames, it's really important to have the queen active in some way. And then there's this very subtle point in this endgame. It was very important to defend these diagonals. If, for example, this very natural move, unfortunately it loses straight away because of this check, you might hope, well, maybe I can get some perpetual with these bad queens. But black has an even better move here, which is throwing a check here to push you in front of this pawn and then promote. That's how, and so black would actually win that endgame. So really tricky endgame, and the key is to get your king in a place where it can't be checked too easily, especially it can't be checked by a queen which is defending this square. Now here, unfortunately, the queen is defending this square, but we have to play actively and then bring our queen in and grovel for the draw. So it's a very beautiful endgame, and there were 3 stages. The corresponding squares in the first stage, very complicated concept, but very important. Corresponding to every square, there's a corresponding square to hold the draw. In the second stage, although we lose our opposition, it turns into a pawn race, which we can hold as long as we play exactly accurate moves. So we must push that pawn, we must go to this square. And in the third stage, it's a queen endgame, and we have to try and play actively, try and win this pawn, and try and avoid our king getting checks on critical diagonals, and even give up our best pawn in order to get the perpetual we need to force the draw. So I thought it was just to introduce just this one position I thought was really interesting, and to do a little deep dive into it. So I hope you enjoyed. Let's see who's in the chat. A few people. I think I'm going to raid someone else who's streaming chess on Lichess. I think I'm going to raid Lefong. So I'll send you over to him, and have a good night. Bye guys.